I think in the South African context, that women are actually leading this social media specific content creation. The quirky things that make you who you are what is attractive to people, you know. So I found in the beginning, I would hardly re-record. If I said it, I said it, right? I'm a bit better now at that because you can get in trouble. I don't know if you've seen comments on social media like, oh, nobody has a unique experience ever, you know, because we're currently realizing that although we are vastly different in all sorts of parts of the world, there are a lot of characteristics that are similar with all of us in humanity. Women share tips naturally. So your mom went to her friend's house, she had a potato, she says, what is in that potato? You need to tell me right now.
You're listening to the ALX Dare to Be More podcast.
Today's guest didn't just find a seat at the table. She built her own mic stand, hit record, and told South Africa to tune in. Amahle Jax Jata has become the voice of a plugged-in, political curious generation reimagining the evening news in a 60-second TikTok scroll. With her trademark, "How's it?" intro and biting delivery, Jax serves up current affairs with clarity, humor, and cultural insight. She's not just curating headlines, she's shaping how young people engage with power, identity, and justice. With a combined following of over 230,000, did we say listeners, followers, across TikTok, Instagram, and Facebooks, Jax's voice resonates far beyond the scroll. Whether she's unpacking political policy, voter apathy, or gender dynamics, Amahle's voice lands where others often won't go. Smart, funny, fearless, and unmistakably hers. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
How's it?
Okay, so let's kick off a little bit about, your background. Tell us a bit about yourself.
I'm born and raised in the Eastern Cape, and I came to Johannesburg for school. And I had already known a couple of my friends, and so we started an events company. It was June 16th on the Friday, and we had realized it was going to be a long weekend. And so we're like, oh, let's throw a party. And so we threw this party. It was a big success. And we're like, okay, let's do more. And that was the first kind of like entry into this creative space. And then about a year later, everyone started quitting their jobs. I was still in school, quitting their jobs to kind of focus on this thing. And slowly but surely, we started building this until events agency, marketing agency situation. And then from a social media influencer, whatever you want to call it, I just was always just myself on social media, and I think brands just kind of related to that, and that's where I entered the influencer marketing space. And then recently, in the last 3 months or so, I started, because I have a degree in politics, philosophy, and economics, I was like, oh, let me actually start speaking more about the thing that actually interests me, especially looking at a market that's oversaturated with, the typical influencer, which is beauty, lifestyle, fashion, food, that vibe. That's very compactly my story.
Initially, when you entered the influencer space, you weren't necessarily making political commentary. What was your previous focus?
I was just myself, it was groove. I threw parties for a living, so there was a lot of partying content. But every now and then when there was something that piqued my interest, I would then speak on it on my stories or something like that. And for example, the ICJ last year, my TikTok hadn't been formed yet, but when South Africa took Israel to the ICJ, I did a couple of stories on my Instagram and I got a lot of engagement. And so then I took those stories and I moved them to TikTok. And that kind of took off on its own, but I didn't take it seriously, to be honest with you. I was just like, oh, this is just something that I do because I have a job. But I think the more I started doing it, the more I started realizing that there's kind of like a need that people want. It's not that they're not interested in politics or they don't care about current affairs. There's a language barrier time. There's just a basic understanding of the system at the time. And so once I latched onto that and that realization, I then kind of put my back into it.
What was the moment when you were like, I'm going to pivot away from your
event
job
life. Yeah.
inventing life and focus all your energy here. What was that moment for you?
So I was actually just on my couch and I had made a video on TikTok about it was when we had a bit of tension with Rwanda over the our soldiers being in the DRC. And I made some silly video about how we all have to get to the front lines. Xhosa people are going to do this. Tswana people are going to do this. And I, just tried to use the personalities of each South African to be like, you're going to be deployed in the front lines and these are going to be our head negotiators and so on and so forth. And I was sitting on my couch and I was just watching the comments go like, oh my God, tell us more. And finally someone is explaining whatever's happening in Rwanda, etc. And on that day, I made 3 videos and all of them kind of eclipsed over 100,000 views.
Wow.
On that same day. And that was the moment where I was like, oh, okay. Especially coming from an Instagram where everything is pretty and very manicured and curated. I was sitting on my couch in a black dress, there was nothing serious about my setup. It was then that click moment of like, there's a need that people want and I could fulfill it because I do understand politics. For me, consuming politics or current affairs or news is almost entertaining. And so I then had that realization that I could make this entertaining for other people as well. And that was the moment. It was in January this year.
Amazing. I love the organic process. And the fact is that you were saying something that's true to who you are, your essence, what you're interested in. But what was so interesting is identifying a gap of people's needs. And I think that's an interesting just point to call out because so often people are just sort of putting out what they want to put out. But if you're listening to your audience in a particular way, you'll actually begin to see where the opportunity really lies. So let's talk about sustainability in the content creation influencer space, right? Because I think there's a bit of a veil over it, like particularly as an African content creator. I think there's a lot of dynamics behind the scenes around what platforms you can monetize, what you can't. How do you begin to think about actually building a sustainable, secure life in the content creation space? If I was a young person entering this digital economy content space, a young South African or Nigerian, Kenyan, Ethiopian, how would you begin to have people think about just building sustainability around like what you do and what lessons have you learned?
I think the first lesson would be authenticity. I think a lot of people fall into the trap of thinking that they should do what other influencers are doing. And unfortunately, you can copy it and you could probably copy it well, but slowly but surely your audience will see through that. Because the audience and what I've found, especially this year and going on to like a platform like TikTok, is that people have kind of a fatigue towards the standard what an influencer or a social media person does. And so for me, the quirky things that make you who you are what is attractive to people, so I found in the beginning I would hardly re-record. If I said it, I said it, right? I'm a bit better now at that because you can get in trouble. And so for me authenticity was most important, but I also feel like treating it like a job. So I'm sitting at my desk right now, in front of me is my week schedule. On Tuesday, it says that I should do a video about Ibrahim Traore, right? Because that's what's happening in, I think it's Burkina Faso. He's all the rage right now. And so treating it like a job in the sense that bringing structure into your life and consistency into your life. So I know I like to post on a Tuesday, sometimes on a Thursday. So I try and stick to that schedule, scheduling your content creation, giving it the professionalism that it is due. If you haven't worked in a corporate or any other kind of job, that might be more difficult. So it's more along the lines of trying to build a routine, right? And then I think there's also sustainability also works with, kind of building trust with your audience. So research is equally important, even if you're talking about music, even if you're talking about movies, you're entitled to your own opinions, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And so your facts, your opinions must be based in fact at some point, and I strongly believe in that. And so if I want to criticize a political party, for example, I might have certain feelings towards said political party, but if I have a bad opinion or a negative opinion, let me find the fact to back it up, right? It from the way I work. So I would say authenticity, building the trust and consistency, right? And then I also think a lot of people, especially in Africa, we don't understand pricing, which is something that I still very much struggle with. You know, how do I price myself? Especially when you're looking at a 200,000 on TikTok, but 20,000 on Instagram. How does that work? Right. And so the way I first did it was to use one of these these apps on what's this thing called on just on Google, like how much is my rate, and then I put in my social media account, and then they said, oh, this is your rate, this is your engagement, this is that, and so forth. And I was like, okay, cool, that seems a little bit too little for me. Maybe let me adjust it in this way or reduce it in this way, because I feel like that's way too much for the kind of person I am. And then the last thing I would be saying is maintain good relationships with the brand and the agencies, right? So a lot of people, I think, forget that there are people behind the brands, and so you have to treat them with a level of respect. You have to be warm, be kind. People gravitate towards the nice people, the kind people, the people who say thank you, the people who respond to emails, you know, that all of it all counts, because those are the guys that are in charge of your campaigns going forward, right? So I'll give you an example. I find that brands and agencies alike at times, you know, don't know what they want. So before I start shooting something, I draw up a concept document and I'll say what the brief is, what the hashtags are, my content idea, any references I have. I'll send that before I shoot anything. And then they come back to me and they're like, oh, we like this. No, instead of doing this, change that, da 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 da. What that does is show that I'm a professional, right? It shows that I'm willing to engage with the brand. And so even when I don't like a certain brief that I've been given, instead of saying, no, I'm not going to do that, I respond with, hi guys, this doesn't necessarily align with who I am. Can we rather do this? And so I've kind of built those relationships with agencies and brands to say, you can trust me, I can trust you. And I think those would be my things if I had to give advice on sustainability.
The through line that I'm hearing, you're about as good as you're prepared to show up in the totality of everything that you do, right?
Yeah.
And seeing yourself as a brand and being quite clear around your identity, how you're put out in the markets, making sure that it stays true and authentic to the values or the principles that drive what you're building. Young South African wanting to pursue this sector, what are the ways in which I'm able to monetize what I do?
Well, in South Africa, there's YouTube that you can monetize through. If you're looking at Instagram, you would basically be saying that you're monetizing through working with brands. And then I know with TikTok, there is no monetization as yet, but I know our Minister of Communication has made the call to Singapore to say, please, can we monetize South African TikTok? So for me, you are essentially trying to get brands to notice you, right? So either that's through doing reviews, giving people advice. So something as silly as this morning, I'm not paid by Stanley, for example. I was pouring my water before gym, and I was pouring this a new bottle from Stanley, and I was showing how it's got 3 levels, and my caption was simply, the product development people at Stanley have their thinking hats on, right? Because I feel like this cup is so innovative. I'm not looking to Stanley to come to me and be like, hey, be an influencer. What I'm looking for is for my audience to know that there are products that I consume that they can also use, and that they don't necessarily always have to be attached to a brand. I don't necessarily always have to be paid by a brand to show people what I'm consuming. But I also think there is a little bit of a stroke of luck with it. And I guess that's when we're speaking about that viral moment of like having that one video that takes you or rather puts you in the forefront of everyone else, and then the brands start, coming to you essentially. But I think it's it's very difficult to say that there's a strategy for going out to find a brand outside of the other things that I mentioned, of trying to post consistently, being unique and authentic to yourself, finding a niche for yourself that you think is a need out there in the world. Also doesn't help being pretty, I've seen. Some people are pretty, so yeah.
If you had to sort of highlight the top 2, 3 challenges that somebody walking into the space would have to be alive to?
I think there's a lot of underestimation of how difficult this is. Like, because people think it's just you pick up a camera and you just do content, right? For me, what I find most difficult is the preparation of the content, and I find it tedious and exhausting, right? So, researching all the topics, thinking about what to put out there in the first place, researching and all that other stuff, and then being in front of the camera is daunting in itself, especially when you're someone who's as anxious as I am. Who likes to overthink everything, who's pretty much a type A personality. So I found, especially now that I've, taken it more seriously this year, what I find exhausting is just the preparation of it all. And then there's also an element of financial management that I think people maybe underestimate, because it's a system, right? So the brand briefs the agency. The agency briefs you, right? You brief your photographer or your videographer, or you do it by yourself. The brand takes about 90 days to pay the agency. The agency takes 60 days at most to pay you. You need to pay your photographer as soon as that video is online, right? So I've also found cash flow management is extremely difficult, because you'll find in a month I have to do 5 or 6 videos for a brand. They each cost 4,000 Rand. Nobody's paid me. So essentially, where's this money supposed to come from? Right. And then there's the battle when you go back to the agency and you say, guys, I've completed my work. I've done everything. I've given you the insights. It did well. Here's my report, or whatever the case may be. And they tell you, I'm still waiting for brand. That's technically not my problem. But remember, we're also relationship managing here. So I'm not going to go on social media and say, iPhone hasn't paid me. I'm not going to be rude to the person, because I am fortunate enough, me, myself, I'm actually understand the system, because it's the exact same system I went with when I was working, when I had my job and my business, right? So I've understood the stress of the cash flow issue. So I think that for me is a very big one. And so I've started now negotiating things like 50% before, 50% afterwards, and just kind of trying to see where I can manage my cash flow the best. Also building a relationship with the videographer to say, we have 4 campaigns this month. I'll pay you at the end of the month. I'm good for it, and be good for it. That's also important. Like, be good for it, because you're also building a trust with that supplier. I think for me, those are the 2 things. The amount of work it actually takes for a minute video, and then the stress of not being paid on time or not being paid once I've executed that job.
And that's so real, especially for somebody entering the market who has built a following, but you can't assume the cash flow is there. And I think it's not only a learning for other creators to begin to think about how they navigate the terms of their engagement, but I think it's also a learning and accommodation that brands need to make for content creators to show up as the best version of themselves, to get the best out of them, really.
Yeah.
What would you like to see generally improve in the industry that you're in as a young content creator? Like, where would you, in an ideal world, where would you like to see things go?
I would like to see campaigns that are tailored for the people. I think we're currently living in a world right now where campaigns are very much like, she has a big following, let's sell to her. And that's where we're losing that authenticity, I think, with the consumers, right? Where I think agencies or brands are getting a little bit lazy in that if you have a big following, surely you should be able to sell this without doing enough research into, well, does it make sense that Amahle should be the influencer for Steve Madden when every third post of hers is about how much she hates heels? You know what I mean? Like, regardless of her following, she hates
Yeah.
heels, And so I found myself even in a compromised positions because my authenticity matters more than my paycheck for me, that I've said no to certain brands. When I was drinking, there was times where I would say, I can't do that because I don't drink vodka and I drank vodka. I drank vodka every single day. And so for me, tailoring campaigns that are also authentic. We also have an issue, I think, of seeing what happens in the States and thinking it can be automatically absorbed or applied to an African context, which is not the case. I always believe that South Africans are some of the biggest haters in the world. So a collab that is done, and when I say the biggest haters, I mean, like, South Africans always have a side eye to everything. Like, they are cautious. They don't want to part with their money just because so and so is affiliated with something, and we see it with these collaborations that tend to happen, and then nothing comes of it. So I think looking more at what we are culturally, and I understand, and I'm sorry, just to also preface this by saying, I understand brands also have international objectives and they also get their directives internationally. I get that. But I think once we get to what I would consider below the line activations, right? That's what we are. We're walking below the line activations. Those campaigns must be tailored to a South African understanding or Kenyan understanding or all the other parts of Africa, because we don't consume the same. We're not of the same economic standing. We don't, we don't relate to the same things. So you'll find that in the States, Lady Gaga does a collab with McDonald's and everyone runs to McDonald's. I don't think we're that kind of consumer. We want to be convinced. Why is the Lady Gaga McDonald's better than the quarter pounder that I always buy anyway?
That's how
And
you gotta love
so
South Africans.
genuinely. And so for me, I found my biggest issue is when, I'll give you an example. There's nothing I hate more than a get ready with me. Because you don't want me to do the get ready with me the way you think you want it. Because I don't do get ready with me's like that. I don't listen to music when I'm getting dressed. I'm watching Criminal Minds. It's inauthentic to me. So I found myself, I remember I asked this one brand, I was like, instead of get ready with me, can I just use a TikTok sound and put on 5 outfits and not speak? And just put on 5 outfits and just speak and use the sound essentially. And it was great. And the comments were filled with people, oh my God, this is so you. Oh, this is so funny. Oh, because that's what I'm like. And so when we stop with the one size fits all, we'll get more out of these campaigns and the industry in general.
So when you are shaping your content in 60 seconds, is there a particular methodology, framework that you
First of
try
all,
to apply to get the most out of the 60 seconds?
I'm not a 60-seconder. I'm a 10-minute. Like, I'm a 5, because what I do is it's full of detail. And so without that detail, it wouldn't work, right? But there is a
Sure, of
framework.
course.
There's a framework. I always like to start off introducing what I'm about to speak about without necessarily saying what it is, because I feel like that keeps people on for longer. I listened to this podcast once where this guy was explaining how to tell a story. And if you tell the story up front, nobody's gonna listen to the rest of it. And so I kind of think in that way. So I like to give like a little fun fact or a little bit of an intro that's kind of hinting at what we're gonna speak about, but not. The middle part would then be the information that I'm about to give you. And then the last part of it would be my opinion on it, if I feel like I'm giving my opinion on it. And so I'll give you an example of a video I did last week. I was speaking about the EFF and DA taking the finance minister to court, right? I opened that video with, did you know that the British don't have a constitution? Immediately, the person is going to be like, what? They don't have a constitution? I've got you now. You're with me. We're not speaking about Britain, by the way. That's not where we're going. But the whole time you're sitting there thinking to yourself, where the hell is this going? And then I eventually
Got you.
say, okay, obviously, unlike Britain, South Africa does have a constitution, and it's the EFF and the DA are using that constitution to take, and then we get into it, right? And so I
Sure.
always find that there has to be a little bit of intrigue in the beginning. But I think every platform is different, right? And so TikTok, I need to grab you in the first 3 seconds, I think, at most. That scrolling situation is so hectic, right? Whereas I think with Instagram, it has to be beautiful. It has to be pretty. It has to catch my eye before I even digest what's happening to it. I do find that there's that thing that you need to do where you have to hook your people. But I also think that you need to have an intro that's consistent so that people can recognize it. You know, there's like almost mindless scrolling that we do. And so people often tell me that the moment they hear "how's it," they immediately realize that they have to start listening now. And so I would say
Sure.
a tagline of sorts.
That's great. I mean, I think those are such important insights because every platform has its own personality, has its own dynamics, and you can't one size fits all it.
Yeah.
And to be intentional about how you're crafting your content specific to the psychology of that platform, assuming that you would navigating gender dynamics in the space that you're in, right? Being a female content creator. One of the things that we really are trying to advocate for is more women entering the digital economy and the sector that it creates. And I just wanted your perspective on being a female content creator online and what are some of the industry related dynamics you are confronted with.
I think from a social media perspective, women are in the lead in terms of content creation, right? What we actually struggle with is actually finding male influencers. Because I think men kind of have this idea that content creation is embarrassing. All right, like it doesn't suit that man esque, thing of like, why I remember my one friend saying, I understand how you just pick up your phone and talk to it. That's so weird. And I said, but we're having a conversation right now. What's different about that? So I think in the South African context, I think women are actually leading this content creation, social media specific. I think in traditional digital media now, when we have traditional media backing digital media, I think we're having a different conversation. So if you're looking at who are the women in sports, when Super Sports is doing their digital, it's still very male dominated if you're talking about commentators or things like that. In news as well, very much male dominated. I agree with that. So I actually have found that as a woman, this industry hasn't been as tough as the industry I was previously in, where I was kind of, and that's probably where that quote is from, where I was never looked at as an owner, never looked at as someone of value, especially in the beginning. I had all male partners, and it was always assumed I'm someone's assistant, or I'm just a friend that's hanging out, or whatever the case may be. Nothing new, everything that women generally go through. But I feel like in the social media space, I think women are leading the charge. I think women are the highest paid. I think they're getting the most brand jobs. But that's just from my perspective.
I think that's great. And I think that's so liberating to come into an interview and you always walk in with the assumption, because, I'm learning from you that women are the underdog in the sector. That's just like my programming. And so for me personally, it's just great for you to say, nah, we are killing it. In fact, this is one industry where we are excelling. And that be a motive or an inspiration for people to think about the sector.
But also because think about it, women share tips naturally, right? From a lifestyle perspective, that is the community of women, right? So your mom went to her friend's house, she had a potato, she says, "What is in that potato? You need to tell me right now." And that's how community, I know from my family, we have a potato recipe that's not allowed to make it out to other families, for example. That's just the nature of women. We share a lot. Where did you get that dress? Where did you buy this? Or what do you think of this? I'm thinking of buying this. Or, that's just naturally how women are, because that's how we've always survived in community. So it's not far off that we should be leaders in social media, because when you look at it, it's basically the same thing. It's me saying, "Hi, buy this light because I've used it and I think it's great." It's the same concept.
Okay, so tell me, what excites you about this world that you're in over the next few years?
I think for me, it's the sharing of information. We used to live in a very much, I think, idealized world, a very controlled world, where information was fed to us via certain stakeholders, owners. So what I find exciting is the access to knowledge that we've had, right? The other day I spent 20 minutes watching a video about the evolution of pens. Now, okay, I love a fun fact, but it taught me the history of how we got to the big pen that we all use, and then how that big pen essentially changed literacy levels globally, right? And improved literacy levels, because now everyone had an access to be able to write and then access to reading or whatever. And that's kind of how I look at the internet and social media. It's going to open up a whole new world of information for people. It also has opened up new opportunities from a job perspective, from an economics perspective, in that we don't all have to be in an office. We can make our own offices, and that's what's exciting for me. And living in a globalized world and having access to other cultures is what is most exciting for me, because I don't know if you've seen comments on social media like, "Oh, nobody has a unique experience ever," because we're currently realizing that although we are vastly different in all sorts of parts of the world, there are a lot of characteristics that are similar with all of us in humanity. And that's what's exciting for me, is this being able to access and share knowledge. That's why I do it, I guess.
I love that. What you see as next as big on the frontier for African content creators?
We do not have enough access to information on how to travel Africa. And Africa is beautiful. And if I was a content creator who was looking on what to do next, I would do travel in Africa. It's such an untapped market. And a lot of us fear traveling in Africa because we don't know how to travel in Africa. And that's a wild statement to even make, but we'll look to our leaders for why that is so. But, you don't need to tell me about Rome anymore. I know what's in Rome. I know New York, and I know. So for me, every time I see someone traveling in Ghana, and Ghana is even an easy one, and Kenya is an easy one. South Africa is an easy one. What's happening in Burkina Faso? What's happening in Mali? What's happening in all these other countries that don't necessarily have like the white sand and the blue beaches, but are equally full of culture, full of welcoming people, full of diversity, full of spirituality, if you want, religion, whatever it might be. I think that is the most untapped market. It's traveling Africa. And if I had the gumption, I would probably do it.
That's fantastic. What would you say to your 21-year-old self?
She was so
Wanting
chaotic.
to pursue this career?
I would have told her to be more confident in her abilities. I've always underplayed how smart I am. I've always suffocated my interests in maybe you could say, in order to be cool, to not scare people of being this like nerd who's obsessed with politics and all that other, in order to assimilate into society in general. So I would tell her to kind of hone down on those skills, hone down on her education, her knowledge of the thing that actually interests her, because when I was young, I always struggled with what do you want to be one day? It was the worst question for me. I hated that question because I never knew. And so even coming into varsity, I did basically what my mom wanted me to do. And there was a lot of chopping and changing eventually. And if I had stuck to my guns, which was what was interesting to me, which was politics, I would have gotten here sooner, I imagine. But I don't negate, or I don't not enjoy the past 10 years of me building an events company and doing all that other stuff, because it is what is informing me now for me to be understand brand relationships or how suppliers work or how to manage cash flow. But I think we would have gotten here sooner and we would have been content with life faster.
I think we can all take a page out of that book in pursuing the journeys that we walk. So thank you for sharing. Last one. What does it mean to you to dare to be more?
For me, that would mean overcoming fear and ignoring doubt. For me personally, that is my dare to be more. Once I overcome fear and ignore the doubts that I have about myself, I will be more, and it will be excellent. I know it. I just have that issue currently of not believing in myself as much as I should.
Thank you for your openness and vulnerability and just sharing it. There's so many pieces of information, even myself, to take from your experience. So thank you.
Thank you for having
being
me.
with us today. We really, really, really appreciate it. And hopefully there'll be more to come from you in the ALX world.
Yeah, I've heard whispers, but yes, hopefully.